Huh?
Shit. Yeah, man. Fuck out of here, man.
This bitch is crazy.
I like him like that.
Let's take this bitch.
You shouldn't have fucked with her.
Man, you fucking crazy, man. Get out of here.
Get your ass up out of here before I kick your old wrinkly white ass.
Motherfucker crazy. The fuck?
The movie begins with Walter Kowalski standing quietly and solemnly at his wife Dorothy's funeral. The church is full of people, but his grandchildren seem uninterested, dressed more like they're going shopping than attending a funeral. They whispered, joked around, and couldn't sit still, acting completely out of place in such a serious setting. Walter's son noticed the cold, stern look on his father's face. While Father Janovich delivered the sermon, Walter's granddaughter Ashley didn't even try to pretend she was paying attention. Ashley mindlessly scrolled through her phone, looking bored as she checked her messages. Later, during the memorial, the grandchildren went down to the basement and found dusty old photos and war medals. Walter stayed silent, as usual, refusing any help and insisting on doing everything himself, no matter how small the task. Outside, a shy neighbor boy named Theo quietly showed up at the service. The boy had come to borrow some tools, but Walter refused to lend them. Back in the garage, he caught Ashley secretly smoking. Instead of scolding her, he stayed quiet while she casually asked who would get the old couch and, more importantly, the car after he died. Walter didn't reply, but the answer was obvious. To him, the 1972 Ford Gran Torino meant more than almost anyone in his life. Father Janovich often visited, trying to fulfill his last promise to Dorothy to convince Walter to go to confession and find peace of mind. But Walter wasn't interested. To him, church had always been his wife's thing, not his. He brushed off the advice of the 27-year-old priest, believing someone that young couldn't understand real hardship. Walter simply told him to save the sermons for people who actually wanted to be saved. Walter had spent his whole life working on the Ford assembly line and took great pride in American-made cars. So when he saw his neighbors practicing their traditional rituals, he looked down on them, seeing them as primitive. When Father Janovich visited again to try talking to him, Walter finally ran out of patience. Walter lashed out at the young priest, calling him a weak man who only comforted dying old women and told fairy tales about eternal life. Meanwhile, Theo's life was getting dangerous. On the street, he was harassed by a Mexican gang, but was rescued when his cousins, known as the Spider Gang, showed up. They scared the gang off, then immediately turned on Theo themselves. They pressured Theo to join their gang, promising to protect him if he agreed. He tried to say no, but they wouldn't leave him alone. A short time later, while he was working in the garden, they cornered him again. Spider pointed coldly at the shiny Gran Torino parked nearby, a clear threat. That same night, Father Janovich even followed Walter to a bar, still determined to carry out Dorothy's last wish. Hardened by the painful memories of the Korean War, Walter had no interest in moral lessons from someone who only knew about war through books. Around midnight, he heard noises coming from the garage. His heart pounding, he grabbed his rifle and went to investigate. There, he caught someone trying to steal his Gran Torino. He aimed his gun but suddenly stumbled, losing his balance. A gunshot echoed through the night. Terrified, Theo ran off into the darkness. After that, Walter started preparing for trouble. He loaded his rifle and strengthened every corner of his house as if getting ready for war. Even though the war had ended decades ago, he could still feel its shadow right outside his door. His son called him, but their conversation quickly faded into silence. It was obvious that his son only called when he needed something, and Walter had no patience for small talk or fake concern. Meanwhile, Spider kept coming around the neighborhood, still trying to recruit Theo into his gang. This time, Theo stood his ground and refused. When Spider and his crew came back to drag him into the car, his entire family rushed outside to stop them. Chaos erupted, and the fight quickly spread onto Walter's lawn. Seconds later, his door flew open. Walter stormed out with his rifle in hand. He glared at Spider, making it clear what would happen if they didn't back off. The gang retreated, shouting threats, but their bravado disappeared in front of Walter. Theo's family was shaken but deeply grateful. The next morning, they came to his door with flowers and food, a simple yet sincere way to thank him. But Walter met them with a scowl and his loaded rifle. He didn't want their thanks and threw all their gifts straight into the trash. Sue's sister, who spoke fluent English, tried to be friendly and start a conversation, but Walter barely responded. Not long after, Father Janovich showed up again, still determined to get through to him. Walter nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, while Sue was out on a date, 3 thugs suddenly surrounded her. They taunted and cornered her. She tried to stay strong, but was badly outnumbered.
Fuck out of here.
Huh?
Shit.
Like that.
Let's take this bitch.
Teach your ass a lesson. That's what you
Stop!
Just then, Walter's truck pulled up. He got out, calm and silent. The thugs laughed at the old man until they noticed the gun in his hand. In an instant, everything changed. Without saying a word, Walter made it clear what would happen if they didn't back off. His threat was calm but deadly serious. The thugs quickly retreated, and he drove Sue away from danger. On the way home, he scolded her for dating someone who wouldn't even try to protect her. Sue stayed quiet and didn't respond. Instead of answering, she told Walter about her people, the Hmong, who came from the highlands of Laos, Vietnam, and southern China. They had fought alongside the Americans during the war, but after the U.S. withdrew, North Vietnam began hunting them down. Her family came to America just to survive. In Walter's eyes, young men like Theo often faced the toughest challenges. Meanwhile, Walter's own children felt a pang of guilt when they realized they had given up on trying to understand him. On his birthday, they brought gifts that only offended him: a large button phone and a grab stick. Then they hinted that it was time for him to move into a nursing home. Walter didn't say a word but threw the gifts out of the house while they were still holding them. Later, Sue noticed Walter sitting alone on his porch with a beer. She invited him to her family's barbecue. Walter grumbled and said no, but she joked that the only rule was he couldn't touch the dog meat because they only ate cat. Her joke made him laugh. Not long after, Walter walked across the lawn and tried one of his neighbor's homemade beers. Inside, Sue's grandmother stared at Walter with cold eyes, as if she were looking at an older, harsher American version of herself. The rest of the family watched him like he was some strange animal in a zoo. Walter didn't say much, but he understood what he saw: a family built on tradition, loyalty, and respect. Things his own family no longer had. Then his cough came back. With a clear mind, Walter quietly went upstairs, stepped into the bathroom, took a deep breath, and looked at himself in the mirror. Then he sat down with another beer and silently admitted that he felt closer to the slant-eyed boy than to his own distant family. For the first time that day, he began to eat with real appetite. A warm feeling slowly grew inside Walter, softening him bit by bit. Sue called him downstairs, where the younger kids were hanging out, and unlike the adults, they all spoke fluent English. When Walter showed up, Theo was sitting by himself. Walter started chatting playfully with a girl named Yua, then nudged Theo, teasing him for being so quiet. The girl laughed, clearly amused. Walter called out Theo for sitting quietly all night like a rock. He teased him, trying to stir up a little pride, and it worked. Slowly, things started to change. Walter began to enjoy the food his neighbors brought, no longer throwing it away but accepting it. One day, Theo's mother visited Walter and insisted that her son make up for the family's shame by working for him immediately. Walter tried to say no, but she wouldn't back down. The next morning, Walter told Theo to go outside and count the birds as a simple test. Walter kept testing Theo, trying to tire him out, but the boy stayed determined and never complained. Impressed, Walter started giving him real work, and they began fixing up the house together even as Walter's cough got worse. At the hospital, Dr. Chu recommended a full checkup. The results weren't good. Walter didn't say much, but he knew exactly what they meant. He called his son, hoping to finally be honest with him, but the conversation went nowhere. The gap between them only grew wider. Meanwhile, Spider was still furious. Theo's failed attempt to steal the Gran Torino had embarrassed the gang, and now they wanted revenge. Sensing trouble ahead, Walter decided to take real action. He started teaching Theo like a grandson, showing him practical skills like using tools and fixing things. Theo was amazed by Walter's garage, where every tool was perfectly organized and well cared for. For Theo, it felt like entering a completely new world. Walter gave him a small toolkit with pliers, tape, and rust spray enough to fix most problems around the house. It felt like a priceless gift. When Walter couldn't lift the heavy refrigerator out of the basement by himself, he finally swallowed his pride and asked for help. Theo stepped forward and offered to lift the heavier side, but Walter stayed stubborn and kept barking orders. Theo stood his ground, saying he wanted real guidance if he was going to help. That moment became a turning point. He wasn't just learning new skills, but also gaining confidence. From then on, Theo and Walter started to act like true family. Theo carefully washed the Gran Torino, helped out in the garden, and worried about Walter's non-stop smoking and constant cough. One day, he mentioned his dream of working in sales like Walter's oldest son, but Walter just laughed and called it legal stealing. Theo didn't have many options, no college, no diploma, and no clear future ahead. So Walter promised to help him find a job, but first, he needed to learn some manners. They began at the barbershop, where Walter explained that men usually talk about work, girlfriends, or cars to show confidence. The barbers joined in, giving Theo a quick lesson on how to speak clearly, stand tall, and carry himself with pride.
Excuse me, sir. I need a haircut. If you ain't too busy, you old Italian son of a bitch prick barber. Boy, does my ass hurt from all the guys in my construction job.
Walter took Theo to a construction site and introduced him to a foreman he knew. Theo made a great impression and was hired right away. Soon after, Walter gave him a tool belt, simple but meaningful, which touched Theo deeply. But the peace didn't last. One evening, as Theo was walking home from work, Spider's gang ambushed him, beat him up, stole his tools, and burned his face with a lit cigarette. When Walter saw Theo's injuries, he was enraged. Theo didn't want revenge, but Walter couldn't let it go. He hunted down one of the gang members, beat him badly, and pulled a gun, warning them to stay away from Theo or pay the price. Things calmed down for a while after that. During this peace, Theo finally built up the courage to ask Yua out. Walter was proud of Theo and even let him use the Gran Torino for his first date with Yua. The car, his most prized possession, had become a sign of trust, but the night quickly turned into a nightmare. The Mong family's house was sprayed with bullets. No one was killed, but Theo was cut on the neck, and Yua never made it to her aunt's house as planned. Hours later, Yua was dropped off at her doorstep in terrible shape, bruised, bloodied, and shattered both physically and emotionally. Walter broke down, overwhelmed with guilt, knowing his actions had provoked the gang's attack. In a fit of rage, he lost control, smashing furniture and mirrors until his hands were bleeding and he could barely stand. Soon after, Father Janovich arrived. He had just come back from taking Sue to the hospital. The whole family was terrified, and no one dared to talk to the police. Without any witnesses, the authorities couldn't do anything. The violence would keep going unless someone found the courage to stop it. That night, Walter quietly poured himself a light drink and shared it with Father Janovich. The young priest admitted that he was angry, too angry about the violence, the fear, and the helplessness around them. The next morning, Theo showed up at Walter's door, his eyes filled with fury. He wasn't looking for comfort. He wanted justice and believed Walter wouldn't let things slide. Theo was ready to fight, but Walter stopped him. Walter had made enough mistakes to know where revenge would lead, and he didn't want Theo to bear that weight. He told the boy to go home and think things over. Then Walter took a long bath, letting the silence ease his tired body. Afterward, he went to the barber shop, where Martin the barber, who had joked with him for years, gave him one last haircut. After that, Walter went to a tailor and ordered a perfectly fitted black suit. It was clear he was getting ready for the end. He also kept his promise. Walter went to church and entered the confessional. Father Janovich was surprised when it ended almost immediately. Walter confessed only one thing, that he had failed his sons. That was all. The priest told him to leave with a peaceful heart. Walt met thou one last time to say goodbye. He gave the boy a rifle and his most precious possession, the Silver Star Medal. He then talked about the night in Korea when he killed more than a dozen men in battle and was the only one who survived. Walter spoke with a serious tone, saying that killing is the heaviest burden a person can carry, and it never fades. No matter what thou wanted, Walter wouldn't let him live with that weight. He told the boy he was proud of the man he was becoming, but he wouldn't allow revenge to ruin him. After that, Walter left his loyal dog with Sue's grandmother and called Sue to tell her where the basement key was hidden. Father Janovich and the police waited for hours near the gang's hideout, but nothing happened. The place stayed completely quiet. After a while, they were told to leave, and the priest went with them. Once the area was empty, Walter finally made his move. He walked out into the street, standing alone in front of the gang. Standing alone, Walter showed no fear. He taunted the gang while calmly lighting a cigarette, every motion slow and controlled. Then he pointed his hand like a gun and reached into his coat. In that split second, the gang started shooting. Walter collapsed, motionless on the ground. Walter wasn't carrying a gun, only a lighter. He died unarmed, but his death wasn't meaningless. His sacrifice pushed the authorities to take action. The gang was taken down and justice was finally done. The violence was over. Later, Sue Thou and Father Janovich came together to say their goodbyes. The priest confessed that it was only after meeting Walter Kowalski that he truly understood the meaning of life and death. At the funeral, the Hong community wore their traditional clothes to honor Walter, who had always supported them. When the will was read, his family sat quietly, stunned that they inherited nothing. Walter left his house to the church and gave the Gran Torino to Thou with one rule: no chopped roof, no flashy spoilers, and no bright, gaudy paint.